The colony ship had been dark for 11 years before anyone on Earth noticed the silence. That was the first thing they stole from us, the silence. Not our cities, not our weapons, not the stockpiles of grain and the undersea cables and the satellites strung across the sky like a second-hand jewelry rack. The silence. The ability to say nothing and have that mean something. When the Veth arrived, they didn't land with fire and proclamations. They landed with administrators. They landed with clipboards and calm voices and a word they repeated so often it lost all meaning. Stability. Stability required movement permits. Stability required communication filtering. Stability required the Office of Human Compliance, a thing that sounded like a department in a mid-sized insurance company and worked exactly like one, right down to the ergonomic chairs and the fluorescent lights and the way the people inside it looked at you like a number that hadn't been entered yet. Major Cale Shepard had one of those chairs. He'd earned it in the way you earn something you're ashamed of, gradually, by staying quiet when staying quiet was the easy thing and the wrong thing, and by doing the work they gave him because the work was real and the enemy was real, and he had genuinely believed in those first 2 years that working the inside of a thing was the only way to find its seams. He still told himself that at 0500 every morning when he shaved, he was getting worse at believing it. The Veth didn't look like monsters. That was the thing nobody told you, and nobody would believe until they saw it. They were tall, not grotesquely, not Lovecraftian, just tall, and thin in a way that suggested a world with less gravity, a skeleton built for a lighter load. Their faces were concave, the features arranged in a shallow bowl like a satellite dish, and their eyes were set wide and slightly forward-facing, which gave them an expression of permanent, patient attention that humans read as calm and that Shepard had slowly come to understand was something else entirely. The Veth didn't experience urgency. They had no word for it. They experienced probabilities, cascading sets of likely outcomes, and they managed those outcomes with a bureaucratic thoroughness that would have been admirable in another species, in another context. They had been administering subject civilizations for 400 years. They were very good at it. The Office of Human Compliance occupied the 15th through 22nd floors of what used to be the Federal Building in what used to be called Denver. Shepard's office was on 19, which meant he could see the mountains from his window if he looked west, which he rarely did because looking west meant thinking about what used to be out there and what used to mean something. The checkpoint on Colfax was easier to look at. It reminded him why he stayed. His driver, Corporal Ellis Willing, was 23 years old and had the kind of face that forgot nothing. He was waiting at the curb with the car running when Shepard came down at 0600, collar up against the December cold, breath coming in quick white puffs. "Morning, sir," Willing said. He didn't say anything else until they were past the first checkpoint, past the second, out onto the connector road where the Veth surveillance relays were spaced far enough apart that the blind spots lasted almost 40 seconds if you stayed between the third and fourth relay towers. 40 seconds was enough. Davis made contact, Willing said. He kept his eyes forward, both hands on the wheel, voice flat as a weather report. "The Underground has him. He's moving tonight." Shepard looked out the window. What does he know? Everything. He was on the planning committee for Hammer. How much of Hammer? All of it. The mountains were very clear in the cold air. Shepard watched them until they disappeared behind the relay tower and said nothing. Lieutenant Colonel Anton Davis had been, one of the architects of the Office of Human Compliance. A true believer, or so the Veth had believed. What they hadn't calculated, because they were very good at administering but not quite as good at understanding, was that Davis had a brother. The brother was a priest, or had been before the office closed half the churches. Reverend Thomas Davis ran what the office classified as an unsanctioned spiritual congregation out of the basement of a pre-compliance library in what used to be the Capitol Hill neighborhood, which meant he gathered maybe 30 people in folding chairs on Tuesday and Thursday evenings and talked to them about things the Veth hadn't figured out how to ban yet. Endurance, memory, the specific human stubbornness that refuses to believe a thing is finished just because someone powerful has declared it so. Shepard had grown up 3 doors down from both of them. He'd been best man at Anton's first wedding, and he'd sat in the back row of Thomas's ordination, and he'd spent the better part of 2 decades wondering how 3 boys from the same block had ended up on such perfectly divergent lines. He knew now, the divergence wasn't political. It was about what you believed a human being was worth General Ro Sarath commanding, called Bruce by the human staff, because Veth designations were incompatible with human short-term memory, and the Veth had accepted the nicknames with the sort of amused patience a schoolteacher shows a slow student, was waiting for Shepard when he arrived on 20. Bruce was standing at the window. The mountains were behind him. He looked at Shepard with those wide, forward-facing eyes and tilted his head at the angle that meant he was processing something he hadn't resolved yet. Davis, Bruce said. He said it the way a Veth said most things, as a complete sentence, as a point from which all other points would radiate. I'll find him, Shepard said. You knew him. I knew his brother better. Bruce was quiet. A Veth quietness was different from a human quietness. There was no tension in it, no performance, no sense of something being held back. It was just the absence of output, a machine in standby. The brother is registered to the library congregation, Bruce said. Our monitoring indicates he has not been involved in society activity. He probably isn't. You will speak with him regardless. Shepard said nothing. The church, Bruce said, has been cooperative. He turned away from the window. The light caught the concave plane of his face in a way that made the shadows gather wrong. Operation Hammer proceeds in 9 days. Davis's knowledge of the timeline makes him a priority extraction. He must not reach the Society's broadcast infrastructure. Shepard nodded. I have assigned Corporal Willing to your detail. You trust him? Completely, Shepard said, which was true, and which was the most dangerous true thing he'd said in years. He went to find Thomas Davis that evening. Christmas lights were going up along Colfax. Not because anyone was celebrating, not exactly, but because the Veth had determined that maintained cultural ritual improved compliance indices and had issued a directive encouraging recognized seasonal expression. The lights looked like what they were, decoration issued by permission. Shepard passed them without slowing. The library still had its old sign. The letters faded to gray. The basement windows were dark from the outside, blackout cloth taped to the glass, but there was a thread of yellow light under the door at the bottom of the stairwell, and when Shepard knocked twice and waited the way he'd been told to knock since he was 19 years old, the door opened. Thomas Davis looked like his brother the way a photograph looks like the person it depicts. Same structure, different substance. Anton had always been polished, contained, a man who presented himself like a document. Thomas was the document after someone had lived with it a while, crumpled and annotated and stained with something that might have been coffee and might have been certainty. Cale, Thomas said. He didn't step back immediately. His eyes moved to the stairwell, to the street beyond it, back. I'm alone. Thomas stepped back. The room smelled like candle wax and old paper, and the specific cold that settles into basements and never quite leaves. Shepard counted 11 people in the folding chairs. They looked at him the way civilians always looked at uniforms. A frozen half-second of calculation, threat assessment, memory check. He's all right, Thomas said. Most of you should go. Most of them went. 3 stayed. A woman with a scar along her jaw, an older man with hands that shook until they didn't, a young person of ambiguous age who sat very still and watched Shepard with eyes that had already decided something. Anton, Shepard said. Thomas sat down in a folding chair and put his hands on his knees. He looked at them for a moment like a man inventorying damage. He came through 3 nights ago. Wouldn't tell me where he was going. He looked. Thomas stopped. He looked like a man who'd finally understood something he'd been refusing to understand for a long time. He's running from us. From them. Shepard said nothing. You're not them, Thomas said. Or you used to not be them. I genuinely can't tell anymore, Cale, and I'd appreciate if you didn't ask me to. I need to know where he went. I don't know. If you did? Thomas looked up. The candlelight did things to his face that made him look older than he was, and also somehow clearer, like a thing seen at the right distance. If I did, he said, I wouldn't tell you. And I think part of you came here knowing that. And I think you came anyway because you needed to see if I could still tell the difference. He paused. Can you still tell the difference, Cale? Shepard left without answering. It wasn't evasion. He genuinely didn't know, and that was more frightening than either answer would have been. Willing was waiting outside the checkpoint radius, engine off, sitting in the cold, with his collar up and his breath making small clouds. He looked at Shepard when he got in and said, Well, he doesn't know. Does Bruce? Bruce thinks the priest is uninvolved. Shepard looked at the thread of yellow light under the library door. Someone had replaced the blackout cloth. He isn't. But they haven't gotten far enough into him to know what he knows. What does he know? that his brother is alive. Shepard pulled the door shut. And that there are still people who think that matters. They found Anton Davis on the 4th day. Not Shepard, not Willing. The network found him, the Society of Man's Underground, a thing that ran on dead drops and borrowed frequencies, and the specific human talent for operating in the gaps of a surveillance system built by minds that had never needed to hide. Davis was in a basement apartment 12 blocks from the library. He'd been there since his brother's congregation, and he looked like a man who'd been running on adrenaline until the adrenaline ran out and had discovered that what was underneath it was not rest, but something harder and more honest. He was dying. Not from violence, from a cardiac event, the kind of thing the body does when it has been under sustained extreme stress for too long, when it has been asked to operate at a level that the engineering doesn't support. He was conscious when Shepard found him, lying on a cot with his coat still on, his face the color of old concrete. "Cale," he said. His voice sounded like something heard through a wall. Shepard sat on the edge of the cot. He didn't ask about Hammer yet. "He's fine," he said first. "I saw him. He's fine." Something moved through Anton Davis's face that had no name in a Veth language. It was the thing that happens when a person who has accepted a cost learns the cost was maybe not what they thought it was. Not relief, not vindication, just a settling, a small recalibration of what had been held braced. "I know what they're going to do," Davis said. "The power grid. 17 simultaneous infrastructure events across 8 regions, attributed to the Society. It gives them grounds to double the compliance force, triple the checkpoint density, reclassify civilian assembly as a security threat." He coughed. It was a bad cough. The whole thing is staged. Every event. They built the capability into the grid themselves when they installed the new relay architecture. A failsafe they could trigger. He looked at Shepard. "A false flag, KL. They're going to burn their own house down and put it on us." "When?" 5 days, Christmas morning. He almost laughed. They thought the symbolism was appropriate. Veth have a concept, something like a rededication, a formal closing of a prior cycle. They're going to rededicate the occupation. Christmas morning. Shepard sat with that for a moment. The apartment was very quiet. Somewhere above them, a child was walking, small footsteps crossing the ceiling in an irregular rhythm. "The broadcast infrastructure," Shepard said. "The Society has it? 2 nodes, one in the mountains, one in the calm dead zone east of the old Air Force base. If the true source data, the command logs, the architectural plans, the Veth internal routing that shows the trigger was built in, if that gets broadcast on the Society's frequency before the events happen, on Christmas Eve, it reaches every receiver the underground has seeded. 17,000 units. People will know. People knowing doesn't stop the events. No." Davis looked at the ceiling. The child was still walking up there, back and forth, back and forth. "But it stops the attribution. And attribution is what they need. They can stage the damage. They can't stage the public understanding of what it means if people already know." He turned his head. "The logs are in a data shard. I have it. I've had it for a month." He reached into his coat and took out a small piece of hardware. A shard drive the size of a thumbnail, the kind that were technically prohibited for civilian use. He held it out. His hand was shaking, and Shepard couldn't tell if it was illness or cold or something else. "I was going to get it to the Society myself," Davis said. "I would have." He said it with the particular dignity of a man asserting something he needed to believe. "I would have gotten it there." Shepard took the shard. It weighed nothing. It weighed everything. Anton Davis died 4 hours later, in the basement apartment, with the child still walking overhead, and the Christmas lights permitted by directive, making their cold colors on the ceiling. Shepard sat with him until it was over. There was no practical reason to do this. It was not a strategic act. It was a human act, the kind the Veth would not have computed as meaningful, the kind that has no entry in an efficiency ledger, the kind that makes us what we are. He called Willing. He said 2 words. "He's gone." And Willing, who was 23 and had a face that forgot nothing, said "I know" in a voice that meant he'd already made whatever decision was waiting to be made. Bruce called Shepard at 2200. The Veth did not observe human sleep schedules, which was consistent with their understanding of a workforce as a resource to be accessed at optimal times, rather than a population of beings with interior lives. Shepard answered. "The Davis situation," Bruce said. "Unresolved," Shepard said. "He was located in the Cheeseman district, according to our network telemetry. Your vehicle was logged passing through that grid 4 times this week." Shepard said nothing. Operation Hammer is now 4 days out, Bruce said. Your presence on the execution team has been formalized. You will receive full briefing documentation tomorrow. A pause, not hesitation, which Veth didn't experience, but the calculation interval before a next statement. I trust you will bring the same thoroughness to this task that you have brought to the others. Of course, Shepard said. He stared at the shard drive for a long time after he ended the call. The mountains were full of communications hardware that nobody officially acknowledged. The Society of Man had been building it for 6 years, threading cable through rock and installing transmitters in places that looked, from the air, like geological feature data, thermal anomalies, mineral readings, nothing that resolved into infrastructure until you were looking at the exact right angle with the exact right knowledge. Willing had that knowledge. He'd been carrying it for 3 years, longer than Shepard, passed to him by a woman who died in a compliance detention facility before Willing was old enough to shave. They went up on the night of December 23rd. No permits, no logged travel. They took the vehicle to a transfer point 20 kilometers west of the city and walked the rest of the way, because Willing knew where the gaps were, and Shepard had stopped asking how he knew things. The cold at elevation was a different thing from the cold in the city. The city cold was managed, monitored, a weather condition within a controlled environment. This cold was indifferent, ancient, the cold of a planet that had been here before any of this and would be here after. Shepard found he didn't mind it. He found he was breathing differently out here in the dark, with the shard in his pocket and the city a diffuse orange glow far below, like something unwinding that had been wound too tight for too long. Willing was quiet. He'd been quiet since the call with Bruce. He walked with the particular efficiency of someone who's been trained and has had the training overlaid with something more durable. Instinct, necessity, the specific economy of a person who has never been able to afford a wasted step. He's going to know, Willing said, meaning Bruce. Yes, when? When the broadcast goes out. Shepard looked up. The stars out here were astonishing, more than the city ever showed. The full quantity of them, the thickness. He'd forgotten what that looked like. Or maybe before. He's been suspicious for a while. And after the broadcast? After the broadcast, Hammer is exposed. The attribution falls apart. They can still trigger the events. Maybe they will, out of spite. Or to assert that attribution doesn't require consent, but it won't do what they need it to do. Without the public crediting the society, without the fear that the society did this, the population doesn't cede the additional compliance authority. That's not a victory. No, Shepard said. It's a prevention. It's stopping something worse from becoming the condition everyone adapts to. He put his hand in his pocket and felt the shard between his fingers. Sometimes the victory is that the thing doesn't happen. That's a hard thing to feel, but it's still a thing. Willing was quiet again. The snow crunched under their boots with a regularity that became almost musical. My mother used to say that, Willing said. He said it in the tone of someone accessing something they don't take out often, a keepsake. Something that's fragile, not from age, but from how much it means. She said that most of the good things people do are invisible. They're the things that don't happen because someone made a choice. She sounds like she was smart. She was. The compliance archive has her listed as a security impedance. They have a lot of smart people in that file. The transmitter station was built into a rock shelf at 3,400 meters, concealed under thermal insulation material that read as bare rock to the Veth's orbital sensors. It was staffed by 2 people when Shepard and Willing arrived, a woman in her 50s who introduced herself only as Reach, and a young man with a prosthetic left hand who was clearly the technical lead and who looked at the shard drive Shepard held out as if it were a thing he'd been dreaming about for a long time. Is this what I think it is? The young man said. Command logs, architectural routing data, internal Veth communications establishing that the power grid trigger was built in, not retrofitted. 19 months of documentation. Time-stamped? Veth internal timestamp, cross-referenceable to Earth calendar. It's clean. Davis was meticulous. The young man took the drive with his real hand. His prosthetic, a thing of obvious local manufacture, held together with printed brackets and adhesive tape and what looked like a repurposed bicycle cable, opened and closed once in a gesture that had the quality of an acknowledgement. Broadcast window? Shepard asked. We go out at midnight, Reach said. Christmas Eve. They won't be listening for it. Tonight is a maintenance window for their surveillance net. 37 minutes of degraded coverage in our frequency range. She looked at Shepard steadily. You came yourself. Yes. That was a risk. It was a choice, Shepard said, which was different. The young man with the prosthetic hand had already moved to the equipment. He worked with a focus that had a quality Shepard recognized, not urgency. The Veth would never have understood it, but something more patient and more durable. The focus of a person who believes what they're doing matters and has decided to act as if that belief is sufficient. Willing stood at the entrance of the shelter and watched the dark outside. The stars were still visible. The city glow was below and the sky was above, and between them the mountains were simply present, enormous and indifferent and permanent. He's going to send people up here, Willing said, meaning Bruce. Yes, after the broadcast. We need to be gone before that. We will be. And then what? We can't go back. Shepard looked at the young man working, at the careful hands, one natural, one built from necessity and ingenuity, and the human refusal to accept that a missing part means a missing capacity. He looked at Reach, who was running signal checks with the calmness of a person who has made peace with a particular kind of risk. He looked at Willing, 23 years old, face that forgot nothing, who had been carrying 3 years of this weight on a frame that was not built to carry it and had carried it anyway. No, Shepard said. We can't go back. The society. Yes. Willing nodded. He turned back to the dark outside, still watching. After a moment, he said, She used to hum while she worked. My mother. Something old. I don't know what it was. She said she didn't know either, that her own mother hummed it and she just kept it going. Shepard didn't say anything. The equipment was cycling up. He could hear the frequency shift, the particular sound of a system moving from standby to broadcast. I thought about stopping, Willing said. A year ago. I thought, this isn't working. They're too organized. They've been doing this for 400 years. They know every angle we're going to try before we try it. He paused. Then I thought about that hum. Something so small it doesn't even have a name. Passed from person to person, still going. Something they couldn't catalog or confiscate because it doesn't exist anywhere they can reach it. The broadcast began at midnight. The timestamp was exact, the signal clean, the data package intact and authenticated by Davis's careful, meticulous, desperate months of documentation. It went out on 17 simultaneous frequencies across the mountain network and the dead zone relay east of the old Air Force Base and every receiver the Society had seeded in 11 years of invisible, unnamed, uncatalogued work. 17,000 units in basements and buried cache points, and the undersides of official vehicles, and the lining of a coat belonging to a man in a folding chair who ran an unsanctioned congregation in a library basement in what used to be Capitol Hill. Shepard watched the signal strength indicator and did not feel what he'd expected to feel. He'd expected something conclusive, some weightlifting, some internal resolution of the long tension. Instead, he felt something smaller and more durable, a sense of continuation, of a thing still in motion that was now in motion differently, a river that had found a different channel. Not the end. Not a victory clean and complete, a prevention. A Christmas morning that would now be different from what it had been designed to be. Not because the Veth were stopped, but because 17,000 people would wake up already knowing what was coming, would be unable to be surprised by it, would have had the explanation before the event rather than the event before the explanation. The Veth were very good at administering. They were 400 years practiced at it. What they had not accounted for, in all that practice, was the specific human relationship to foreknowledge. Other civilizations they'd administered had accepted the information they were given and arranged their understanding around it. Humans were different in a way the Veth had never quite solved, a way that showed up in the data as statistical noise, and that the Veth had written off as cognitive inefficiency. Humans were constitutionally incapable of accepting the frame they were handed without testing the edges of it. Give a human a fact and they would interrogate it. Give them a narrative and they would look for the seams. The Veth had been giving humans narratives for 11 years, and the humans had been looking for the seams for 11 years. And on Christmas Eve, in a signal broadcast from a rock shelf at 300-400 meters, the seams were broadcast on 17,000 frequencies simultaneously. You could not unknow a thing. That was the specific human condition that 400 years of Veth administration had never successfully accounted for. You could suppress a thing, delay a thing, complicate the access to a thing, but once a thing was known, it existed in a distributed network of minds that had no central node, no single point of failure, no administrative archive that could be closed or confiscated. The Veth understood infrastructure. They understood systems. They did not understand, not really, the difference between information and knowledge. The way that information, once truly known, becomes part of the structure of the knowing mind and cannot be separated from it without damage. They were learning. Bruce called at 0400. His voice had the quality of a Veth in a probability recalculation, still smooth, still precise, but something in the frequency distribution different, a resonance Shepard had never heard before. If Bruce had been a human, Shepard would have called it the sound of someone confronting something they hadn't anticipated. The broadcast, Bruce said. Yes, Shepard said. You. Yes. A very long Veth pause. You have compromised a 4-year operational plan. You were going to burn your own infrastructure and blame people who didn't do it, Shepard said, to justify doubling the force that keeps those people from doing anything. He kept his voice level. Not calm, level. Calmness implied indifference, and he was not indifferent. I know the difference between stability and occupation. I knew it before you got here. I just forgot for a while. You will be found, Bruce said. Eventually, Shepard agreed. But the broadcast has already happened. The documentation is already distributed. You can find me, and that's still true. You can find all of us, and it's still true. Another pause. Shepard had the sense in it of a very long calculation completing, not defeat. The Veth did not experience the way humans did, as a sharp thing, an ending. They experienced it as a probability threshold, a point at which the projected outcomes of a given approach fell below the cost of continuing. They were very old and very patient, and they would recalculate and try something else. He knew this. The approach changes nothing structurally, Bruce said. The administrative system remains. Yes, Shepard said, but it's been seen, and things that have been seen, people keep seeing. He ended the call. Outside the shelter, the sky had begun to lighten, the first gray beginning at the eastern edge, a color like something not yet decided. Willing was still at the entrance, and Reach was running the post-broadcast diagnostic, and the young man with the prosthetic hand was labeling and archiving the transmission logs with the calmness of a person who expects there will be a use for them later. Shepard stepped outside. The cold hit him completely, total and clean. The mountains were becoming visible in the growing light. Not appearing, exactly, because they had been there all along, but becoming possible to see, which is a different thing. Below, in 17,000 basements and buried cache points, and the undersides of things, people were reading, people were learning. People were sitting with the specific human discomfort of knowing something you wish you didn't know, and the specific human refusal to put it down anyway. A half-kilometer away, a bird was making noise in the dark. Something small, something cold, something that had no reason to be optimistic and was making noise anyway. Willing came out and stood beside him. He didn't say anything, neither did Shepard. They stood in the last of the dark before the Christmas morning and let the cold be what it was. Not managed, not monitored, not filtered for compliance, just cold and clean and theirs. The hum started quietly. Willing, almost to himself, something with no name and no source except the person before him, and the person before that, and the long, unremarkable, unkillable chain of humans who had passed it forward without knowing why, just knowing it was worth passing. Shepard listened. He thought about what it cost to keep a thing alive that nobody could catalog. What it cost to be the person who carries forward something with no official existence, no verification code, no entry in any administrative record. He thought about Thomas in the basement with the folding chairs, and Anton with the shard drive pressed in his shaking hand, and Willing with 3 years of invisible weight, and the young man with the prosthetic built from parts and necessity, and the refusal to accept that broken means finished. He thought about what the Veth had miscalculated in 400 years of practice. Not the weapons, not the strategy, not the courage, which they had planned for, and countered and planned for again. The miscalculation was the hum, the thing with no name and no location and no central node. The thing you cannot file, the thing you cannot confiscate. The thing that passes from person to person on no frequency they can monitor and arrives, somehow, intact. The light was coming. The mountains were coming. The city below was going to wake up today already knowing what had been planned for it. And that knowledge was already in the structure of 17,000 minds where it could not be reached or removed or administered. It wasn't a victory. It wasn't an ending. It was a Christmas morning that was different from the one that had been designed. That was enough. Not because enough was satisfying, but because enough was real, and real was where humans had always lived. In the space between what was happening and what was possible, in the work of keeping that space from closing, in the hum passed forward by people who didn't know its name and passed it forward anyway. Shepard put his hands in his pockets and waited for the sun.